Hello, this is Nicole Johnson-Starr with the PTSD Retreat Radio Talk Show. Welcome back, everyone, to the Six Senses of PTSD series with food, biochemistry, and PTSD. That's the title of this portion of the series: food, biochemistry, and PTSD. Now, as you guys heard, if you listened to the first segment, you know that we have Pam Killeen out of Ontario, Canada, and Jurgen Plesman out of Australia, both world-renowned experts. I'm going to call you guys that because I know you guys have clients from everywhere. World-renowned experts on biochemistry, hypoglycemia, and curing the body using diet. So I just want to go ahead and, that was the introduction. We're just going to go ahead and continue hanging out and talking. And folks, this is going to get pretty deep because the information they're sharing is vital. You really deserve to listen because what you're getting in medication comes I put it this way. I challenge you to do your research. I challenge you because I guarantee you're going to find some things. Go to Pam Killeen's website. Go to is it hypoglycemia?
hypoglycemia.asn.au.
Okay, so as you guys heard, hypoglycemia.asn.au for Australia, so .au. So go there, do your research. There's a ton of information. Contact these two. I inundate them. They'll love it, I promise. They love getting busy with work, right, you guys?
I do. In fact, a lot of my clients have PTSD or they're on some sort of psychiatric medication. They struggle with depression, anxiety, OCD, insomnia. So I'm working with a lot of people who have mood disorders, mental disorders, and so on, addiction issues. And when they start working with me, it's really not that intimidating because I don't ask anybody to stop using drugs or stop going for talk therapy. What I tell people is as they're on my program and we're building the biochemistry, that they can work with their doctors accordingly and try and wean themselves off the drugs, because by the time people come to me, they realize that the drugs are making them worse and they don't like the side effects of the drugs. So when they find out that there's an alternative, then they're very open to seeking that pathway. So it's just a matter of having that epiphany to say that, you know, the drugs are indeed deleterious to the brain. In fact, Robert Whitaker has written a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, and he's been tracking the side effects of these drugs and how they're actually making us more and more mentally unstable. Dr. Peter Breggin has written a book called Medication Madness, and he outlines, as a psychiatrist, he outlines the side effects of many of the psychiatric medications today. And it's a huge concern, especially when we're seeing, these school shootings and so on. And over 90% of these cases, psychiatric drugs are involved. Because what's happening with these psychiatric drugs is they cause homicidal and suicidal thoughts. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people who are taking these drugs are being told of these very devastating side effects.
That's interesting because people are supposed to be told. And I've actually had people come onto our Facebook page, the PTSD Retreat. They come on there and they're looking for information about the drugs they're taking. They are not being told. And you know what? I must be really naive because I was once married to a doctor who's very, very good at what he does. And he made sure every individual that was getting medication actually knew what they were taking when he was talking to his patients. Family, completely other story. It was just take it. But when it came to his profession, everybody knew. And I just expect every doctor to do this. And that's not the case. I actually have clients that are taking medication for the side effects of another medication. Come on.
May I just say that it's very easy to look up the side effects of drugs when you go to Medline Plus or one of the medical websites, and you look up the drugs and you get all the information there. So Medline Plus is a very good website to look up your drugs. I agree with Pam that you should not withdraw from drugs like that. That was very difficult when I was a probation parole officer because people were on probation not to use drugs. But I knew that that couldn't be done, because legal drugs are withdrawn very gradually under the supervision of a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had an arrangement with my boss, with my senior in the probation parole service. Look, I can't stick to this when they use drugs, provided they don't commit an offense. Now, if they commit an offense, yes, then we have to report them. But if they are using drugs and they don't any other offense, then okay. And some of the judges were in agreement, it was a silent sort of an agreement, between us and the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very difficult to withdraw from drugs, and you have to expect people that are being treated for drug addiction that they will go occasionally back to drugs, provided they stick to the hypoglycemic diet. They're all right. In the end, they will make it.
Yes, when they get stronger and stronger and stronger nutritionally, they can gradually, like you say, Urian, wean themselves off, but it does take a tremendous amount of awareness on behalf of the doctor. And unfortunately, doctors are not necessarily properly trained in terms of how to pull people off medications as they feel they're getting stronger. Of course, I'm emphasizing that latter part of my statement because they must be feeling stronger internally, biochemically, before they can even consider weaning themselves off the drugs. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a missing component in the medical establishment, and that is identifying the addiction factor and being able to work with it accordingly to help these people wean themselves off when the time is right. And I think that doctors, that's a huge injustice in terms of what's happening in the medical schools, because as I understand it, even to this day, they're not being trained in this area. So some of these drugs are being handed out like candy. And one of the biggest problems that I see that's happening out there is the addiction to opiate drugs, the painkillers. Mm-hmm. And it's just causing so many deaths, so much devastation all across North America today. And that's not even a psychiatric drug. That's a painkiller, but it has a mood-altering effect, so it becomes addictive.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and so we have this issue here in our town where I live in a relatively, I suppose, a big city of 350,000 people, and we have 4 methadone clinics, and I understand they're planning on building 2 more. And I got on the radio and I said, well, why are we not identifying why this opiate addiction is happening in the first place? Why can't we nip it in the bud and train doctors appropriately to hand out these drugs so that they're not being handed out like candy? Exactly. And you know that not one single person even responded to that request.
Oh, that's terrible.
They just assume that a drug addiction is that these people have personality flaws, that it's a moral defect, that they're derelicts in society, and I don't see it like that at all. I think that it's a biochemical problem that can be fixed, that addiction is very new in society today. We've seen in primitive cultures where they have access to mood-altering agents, we've seen in these cultures that they will use mood-altering agents like mushrooms or marijuana or what have you, but people who've studied these primitive cultures said they don't see these people crossing the line and abusing these drugs. Mm-hmm. So addiction is what we have today is the perfect storm, right? We have these people who are dealing with weak biochemistries, something I call brain starvation, and you couple that with this hyper-availability of mood-altering substances, activities, and so on, and you have a perfect storm. So we see this addiction epidemic happening today, and because it's the elephant in the room, tragically, we are not talking about it to the degree we need to, because it is indeed, in the United States and Canada anyway, addiction is our #1 health problem. In the United States, it costs the American economy about $500 billion every single year. In Canada, it's costing our economy at least $40 billion every year. And I don't see anything.
I'm sorry, say that again. 40 billion.
In Canada, it costs addiction costs society here in Canada about $40 billion every year. In the United States, it costs the American economy about $500 billion every year.
There's a lot of money that's in this. And you know what? It's interesting because I'm going to bring up something I brought up in a past segment. I was told by an economist who's not willing for me to put his information out yet, but he says I could share this. PTSD, which a lot of individuals that are dealing with PTSD actually suffer from some form of addiction, whether it be alcohol or a substance abuse. PTSD is a $6 billion business. It's a business. It's an industry.
Yeah, once they can have a label, then there's a drug, you see. When people go into a doctor's office and they say that they have constipation, well, there's no drug for constipation. But if you go in and you say you have irritable bowel, or they diagnose you with irritable bowel, now you can be diagnosed. Now there's a drug, a steroid drug that they can prescribe for you.
Yeah.
So they have to have a label, and it comes out of the DSM, the psychiatrist's manual. Basically, once it's in that manual, then it becomes formalized as a label, and therefore there's a drug that's created. Here in Canada, we have a drug policy researcher by the name of Alan Castles. He's the author of a couple of books. One of them is called Selling Sickness, and the other is called Seeking Sickness. Selling Sickness and Seeking Sickness. And if you'd like to hear some interviews I've done with him on the radio, that you can go to my website, pamcolleen.com, and just go to my multimedia page. But Alan Castles, I mean, this man has done his research, and he talks very openly in his books about how the pharmaceutical industry just comes up with these labels in order to basically facilitate the sale of a drug. I'm not saying that people are not suffering. I'm not saying that their symptoms are not real. I think that people are indeed suffering, and we need to get to that suffering, but we have to get to the suffering at a whole other level too, and that means nutritional. That's the missing piece of the puzzle.
Yes.
It's not being embraced.
To stop putting on Band-Aids and creating a bigger issue, we get to go down to the source of the issue. So, and then that's where the focus gets to be.
In my experience with drug addicts, they usually start off at the age of 11, somewhere around there, and you always find a history of anxiety. And then when they take a drug and they are shy and have a low self-esteem, if you have a metabolic disorder, you have a low self-esteem. Now the psychologists are all saying that is psychological. I am saying no, it is most of the time it is biological. But anyway, coming back to the 11-year-old, I have a client in my mind, 11 years old, she starts on drugs, and she said, the first time I had drugs, I felt so happy and relieved. That was a wonderful feeling. Of course, it's a wonderful feeling when you're full of adrenaline. I feel that most mental or mood disorders have one thing in common, and that is the overproduction of adrenaline or stress hormones. And this is why, when you look at adrenaline, its function is to produce glucose in your brain. So therefore, it is a glucose metabolism disorder, and that is why most mood disorders are accompanied by hypoglycemia. I have an article saying silent diseases and mood disorders, and you will find that there are a lot of silent diseases of people who are not aware, for instance, heavy intoxication or most of the digestive disorders, but there are literally hundreds of diseases that have hypoglycemia as a symptom, So,
and you found that PTSD is actually one of them.
Yeah, that is right. I've tested PTSD patients with the glucose tolerance, and 90% are hypoglycemic. So all they need to do is to go on a hypoglycemic diet, right? And then gradually they will get better, because when you PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, you are full of anxiety, full of adrenaline that is produced because of a sickness. Your body is sick and overproducing stress hormone. Now, the thing about stress hormone is very interesting. I had one client was standing at a door, and he was shaking like mad. And I said, what is the matter? I said, on the other side of the door is a man that wants to kill me. Now, that was a delusion, all right? When you pump somebody full with adrenaline, you become delusional, and you start to hallucinate. And that is what happens when you are full of adrenaline. Like when I was dreaming the nightmares, I was projecting the fear that I had in me because of the adrenaline that I pumping in me. If I inject a rat with adrenaline, they become very fearful and they might bite you, So, and that becomes a delusion. So PTSD is very much, is depression that occurred as a result of a trauma, but the trauma is relived all the time, because when you're full of adrenaline, you project an image of a fearful image in your mind, which you see as the cause of the anxiety, you see?
Urian is right. Urian is absolutely right. And to basically expound upon it, let me go back in history to see why our adrenal glands are in such a state, in such a mess today. I think that's what the core of what Urian's saying in terms of blood sugar control, and why protein is so important in terms of stabilizing the neuroendocrine system. And that has to do with this huge change in our diet that has gone on over the last 100 or so years. Now, I can go back further in history and talk about the transition from going from a hunter-gatherer diet to agriculture. In and around that span in our history, about 10,000 years ago, that's when archaeologists and anthropologists and so on found that humans started degenerating. It was around the invention of agriculture. So what happened around that time, of course, is we started displacing animal foods and replacing them with less nutritious plant-based foods. And so we see this degeneration, this physical degeneration happening because in exploring our fossils, they found out that we shrunk about 6 inches, our lifespans decreased, and you start to see the rise of things like infectious diseases, anemia, osteoporosis, tooth decay, and so on, just around that era. So that era was the first assault to our food supply. And then when we fast forward to the early 1800s, with the invention of the steel mill, again, another major assault to our food supply, because we then started displacing animal foods again and replacing them with more plant-based foods like biscuits and cookies and crackers and so on. And then in the middle 1800s, yet another assault to our food supply, yet more plant-based foods in our diet, and that was the invention of the canning industry. So if I can talk about a few more if I have time, but the biggest assault to our food supply happened around World War II, and that was because they learned to stabilize foods for the soldiers in their meals ready to eat, to take out into the field so that it helped them survive while they were out in combat. So these were foods that were only intended to be consumed over very short periods of time, but those technologies that were used in World War II basically were what was used to create these foods that we see stabilized in our middle aisles today in our grocery store. And for the most part, these are a lot of plant-based foods sitting in the middle aisles of a grocery store. So again, we're using these plant-based foods to displace the more nutrient-dense animal foods that contain these wonderful complete proteins along with the animal fat, which together occur naturally in nature, but together help to stabilize our blood sugar the best. That's what helps keep the blood sugar in control, and in keeping the blood sugar in control, this is what helps keep the adrenal glands in a calm state, in a parasympathetic state. This is what we need to stay calm and cool and collected. And unfortunately, when we're putting ourselves on a roller coaster ride with our blood sugar, this is what Urian is talking about in terms of the oversecretion of adrenaline to control blood sugar. Our adrenals are not designed to do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to interrupt you because this this just can't be true. There's no way this is all true. But you actually have proof of this.
No, this is very well known in the natural health world. But unfortunately, it's not being taught in the medical schools because they're basically only taught about 3 hours of nutrition. And what they are being taught in nutrition is this high-carb, low-fat diet, which is a diet that's diametrically opposed to our ancestral diet. And it's a diet that is actually causing the blood sugar imbalances and brain starvation. So it's setting people up for mood disorders and addiction. And this is one of the biggest crimes I see out there. I call the low-fat diet the multi-trillion-dollar lie. And essentially, it set us up. It has predisposed us to being very mentally unstable today.
I'd like to say about the hypoglycemic diet, it is a diet back to the way they were born, over the centuries or the millions of years. But what is interesting is that people go on the hypoglycemic diet and still have problems. And this is because of the influence of the food industry on the avoidance of animal fats. Now, I know, Pam, you are an expert on this, and I want you to talk about this because I believe that the way the hypoglycemic diet is interpreted by people is fatless, without fat, without animal fat, and therefore it is less satisfying. And it is very difficult to convince people that consuming animal fat does not make you obese or fat. Now,
that's all a myth. You're absolutely right, Urian. Animal fat never joined the dark side. Cholesterol never joined the dark side. These are foods that we survived and thrived on for millennia. We always acknowledge these foods, in fact, in cultures all around the world as being sacred foods. But it was commercialism that basically demonized them, wrongly so. And this demonization came from the edible oil industry, the industry that makes things like canola oil, cottonseed oil, corn oil, and so on.
Gee, let's think about that.
And let us not forget the genetically modified organs or food, genetically modified food.
GMO.
That can be very damaging. We are eating food to which we are not genetically modified. We are, you know what I mean?
We're not designed to be eating.
Yeah, these are foods that are developed for patent purposes only. They're for profit. After World War II is when chemicals and patents came to be in mass quantities. And the propaganda around that was that chemicals were going to save humans from their woes, that chemicals were going to help us with our survival, chemicals were going to help feed the world, and so on. So this was very sophisticated propaganda that came post-World War II. And if you ever spoke out against these industries, whether it was agriculture or pharmaceuticals, you were labeled as being somebody who was anti-progress. And Urian, that's what you and I are up against today, is this very thick propaganda that's still out there, that because we are potentially going to compromise the profits of the multinational corporations by deterring people from their products, which are damaging our bodies, damaging our planet, and so on, that we are tree huggers or we are anti-progress or whatever the case may be.
I am so grateful that you guys publicly acknowledge that, and I'm probably going to get in trouble, because somebody's going to be listening to this on the Hill and going, oh my gosh, Nicole's just gone off the deep end. There is such a big issue in the United States. Farmers are being put out of business left and right, and if they talk about it, they're being threatened. And there's wonderful documentaries, and I challenge everybody to listen to them and watch them. But you guys, you're going right back to what I believe in, and I want to hear more, and our folks deserve to hear more. Don't stop. You guys, check out, it just so happens that today, I didn't even know how this was going to look out today, but if you go on the PTSD retreat page, you'll actually see a bunch of food. There's 9 foods on the PTSD retreat page on Facebook that I've put a picture up that are GMO, genetically modified foods that are common in everything we're eating in the United States and in a lot of modern countries, the Western Hemisphere. We're eating things that I can't believe it. It's like, one, it's loaded in herbicides and pesticides and toxins. They're finding it in mother's milk, in their bodies, and in the babies coming out, these toxins. Help us clean up our bodies, you guys.
Yeah, we are brainwashed to believe that we are run by the government, but we are not run by the government. We are run by private industry. Now, private industry is the boss, the big boss in our society. They control our life. The pharmaceutical companies control mental illness, and as long as that persists, we will have trouble.
I will tell you a few documentaries. I have them on my books page, but a few documentaries that I think your listeners really should watch are produced by Adam Curtis. He's a BBC documentarian. I wouldn't even put these in the category of conspiracy documentaries. They're very well done, very professionally done, very tangible information. But he's done a few documentaries on propaganda and on how these drugs are essentially used to control the masses. And this has been very well orchestrated by corporations and the government even. But the documentaries are called The Century of the Self, The Trap, and The Fear of Nightmares. And so in the BBC, he's they're sold in a pack, I think, on Amazon, but you can find them for free on YouTube. All of them are for free on YouTube.
Wonderful.
But certainly just look up Adam Curtis and watch and see how this has been orchestrated. And I talk about Aldous Huxley in my book, Addiction, the Hidden Epidemic, and how even in the 1930s, in his book, his novel, Brave New World, how he foreshadowed how pharmaceutical drugs were going to be used to control the masses. And in the book itself, of course, there's one drug that is used to control the masses, and it's called Soma. And it basically turns everybody in that society into mindless drones, shopping materialistic drones. And if we look around us today, I'm sure, you know, a lot of us could probably say, I think he knew what he was talking about. He certainly had a sense of where things were going.
I will definitely be putting that in. Folks, for those of you who would like to get this information, when I put this into the YouTube video, the list will be right there, and I'll also be happy to put this onto the PTSD Retreat page, and with a point to Pam's page, so you guys can go look at it, and also with information to Jirion about this as well. So, you guys, this is something that really gets to be pages, because we have food coming out. I mean, there's a documentary called Farm Inc., or is it Food Inc.?
Food Incorporated.
Food Inc., yes.
You know about Farmageddon as well.
Oh my goodness, I live in Maryland, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because I'm very angry about what's going on with that.
Yes,
because
and that's all very well orchestrated. They want to keep us forced into buying the food from the grocery stores. That's the bottom line. And of course, the food in the grocery stores is the food that's mass-generated food. Okay, this is not something that's done in an artisanal, careful, meticulous manner somewhere, from a farm, for example, where the farmer and his family is going to produce the food in a very careful manner.
And they know exactly what's going into them.
So, of course, they're going to make the food at as highest quality as possible. When I wrote my first book, The Great Bird Flu Hoax, I had already studied a lot in terms of sustainable agriculture. And I saw some of the shenanigans going on between big food and the multinational corporations and the government, and some of these regulations are just such a deterrent for the small farm to survive in today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the United States, there are more prisoners than there are farmers, you can't make a living farming.
And there's something wrong with this. Mm-hmm. There's so many things wrong with that. Mm-hmm. And we should. One thing, I have a friend. Her name is Amy Lovelace. Amy and Jack Lovelace. They own Saratoga Jack thermal cookers. It's a wonderful product that saves a lot of energy. But she actually put something else. It's interesting. Back in 1913, and we'll even go. We had less. We had more farmers out there. We had more. Information being put out because people expected this. It's not about hiding anything. Everything had to be, understandable. It wasn't all chemicals where you had to, actually be an A student in chemistry to find out what your ingredients were.
Mm-hmm. What they did was they destroyed the small family farm, the mixed farm, old
mm-hmm.
McDonald's farm, where you could go on the farm and get your pasture-raised chicken and pork and beef and raw milk and eggs and so on. You get all of these nutrient-dense foods that sustained humans for millennia, and those are the foods that we have been demonized away from eating, because what have they done post-World War II? They demonized red meat, they demonized eggs, they demonized butter and animal fat as a general rule, and yet these foods never joined the dark side. They were always good for us. But because plant-based foods are easier to produce, easier to ship, have better shelf life than animal foods, if you demonize one food, you're going to be able to sell more of another food. And because of the redeeming qualities in terms of the profits you can make from plant-based foods, that's why this shift has taken place. So indeed, we are eating much less red meat today. We are eating fewer eggs, much less butter. We are listening to the dietary dictocrats, and unfortunately, because we've been listening to them, this is why we are so sick today.
It's interesting. I actually grew up in Germany. I lived. I'm a military brat. I'm very happy to say that, and I lived in the economy. I was really blessed with forward-thinking parents when it came to that. And I thank my mom and my dad for this, because my mother believed that if we're going to live out there, we're going to live like them. And I had the wonderful experience of having fresh milk. You know, and it wasn't like this over-pasteurized stuff in the stores. And I used to be able to go across the street and I can go to my neighbor and go, we need some milk. You know, and I would give them stuff from our garden, which never once had any herbicides, pesticides, any of that stuff. And I never got sick. I didn't get sick as a kid. It took something really big to get me sick.
Yeah, when you go to Czechoslovakia, I went to Czech Republic, and my wife is Czech, so we visited the family there. They all have a garden outside, might be outside the village, and it is like a weekender. You know, they have a shed there, they can stay overnight there, they have pigs there, they have everything growing as a farmer. Because that was during the communist occupation, of course, there was a problem with food. But I'd like to come back to our PTSD patients, because I think, you know, we need to help them overcome their anxiety. Now, first of all, I'd like to say that PTSD never exists in itself. It's always connected to either alcoholism or other diseases.